Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. We're about to begin the Standing Committee on Governance and Employee Issues. Madam Clerk, if you could please do a roll call.
Chairman Clancy.
Here.
Vice Chair Monfredo.
Here.
And Ms. Novick.
Here.
Thank you. I'd just like to remind everybody that we are streaming live on Facebook and this meeting is being recorded. Tonight we are here, or this afternoon we are here to take up two items on the agenda. It's GB 0-359 and CMP 1-1. The first item we're going to be taking up is 0-359, which was a request from the administration. It's to consider approval to turn on the self-harm filter that is available with the current software that monitors students' behaviors. I know that we spoke about it at our school committee meeting, and at that point it was directed to turn off that pilot program, and so that we can discuss it a little bit further today here in governance meeting. So I know there's some representatives here from Lightspeed. Mrs. Benender, I wasn't sure if you wanted to speak on this item before, or Bob, I wasn't sure which one from administration was going to speak on this item.
Okay. Maureen,
I'll let Bob go first. Go ahead, Bob.
Thank you.
So just to give everybody a little background in case they didn't tune into the original meeting, we use a web filter. We filter all the student devices. We use a web filter from a company called Lightspeed Systems. We are required to filter for SIPA compliance, Children's Internet Protection Act. The long story short is we have to filter out pornography, what they call offensive images, that type of stuff. So we've been using Lightspeed for 3 years. They came out with a new product and our contract with them was up. So we switched to the new product. And in that product, they have something called Safety Check. And Safety Check, basically, the Lightspeed filter is sort of a stream of data. You know, as students go to different sites, it's like described as a fire hose of data coming through. And Safety Check can monitor that data coming in, and depending on the triggers that Lightspeed sets, can trigger an event. And so in this case, we're talking about self-harm. So if some student types in, how do I kill myself? How do I, cut myself? Those type of things. That will trigger an event, and we can then say who will get notified when that occurs. So basically, it's a trigger, and I saw this feature. Basically, I was the one who implemented this feature, and I talked to Maureen and the other administrators about this. Rob Pizzella, Maura Mahoney. Do we want to implement this? And so the first question is, well, what exactly is it? What does it give you? What information does it give you? So we turned it on at 2 schools. And within a week or two, we had a few alerts. And so it gave us a better idea of what information we get. I showed you with redacted information what we get. But it brings up a number of questions, who's going to monitor this on the weekends? What is our, how are we expected to react to these, and how quickly are we expected to react to these? What protocols will we have in place in terms of who gets notified? Is it just the principal? Is it the school safety liaison? Is it Maura Mahoney's office? So, just like anything, it raises a number of questions. And so we brought this to the school committee before we did anything further, simply to inform them that this existed and to get their thoughts on it. So, and so we obviously disabled that after that meeting. And so we're here today to sort of learn some more about that feature. So, so Anthony Bruno's here from Lightspeed Systems, and we have another Anthony Bruno in here. That's Mark Russo, is also here from Lightspeed Systems. So, so they can speak more to it if people have questions or if they feel that I didn't do it justice. But I'm going to pass it off to Ms. Benenda, see if she wants to say anything about it. You're muted, Maureen.
Muted.
Go ahead.
Just that, we tried it for a few weeks for those people that aren't familiar with it to see how it worked. And there was probably, I think, no more than 8 students that we had to follow. One of the things that Bob said is true is that it's a 24-hour system. So, as soon as you get that alert, you want to be able to address it. And so the only, one of the concerns that we had is, how would we get the manpower when we open it up to all the schools? So we only had so many schools how many schools was it all together? Was it 4, Bob?
When we first started, it was 2. We discussed expanding it to a high school, a middle school, an elementary school, and I think it may be a 4. I think we were going to expand it to 4 if we continued with the pilot, but we had the school committee meeting and decided not to.
To turn it off. So that was just a question we had. If we decided to continue with it, what does that mean about who would be monitoring it? Who monitored it? For the 2 schools was myself, Bob, Rob Zella, and Mara Mahoney. The 4 of us monitored, and then we would respond to each other and let each other know. But what it basically was, we would see the alert. We would go onto the website, see who was the student. Then we would go into Sage, look up the student, the phone number, then contact the principal, let the principal know that this was the student. This is what the alert had signaled for us. And then the school adjustment counselor and the principal at the school would contact the family. So that's the process that we used. So with that, I'll turn it over. Anthony, did you want to explain exactly what was the idea of bringing that onto as a filter?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you everyone for having us to have this discussion. So again, my name is Anthony Bruno with Lightspeed Systems. Also have Mark Russo on from Lightspeed. But yeah, the purpose of the safety mechanism is we're already looking at all the web content that any of your users are accessing. And as you all know, Child Internet Prevention Act basically mandates schools have a solution like Lightspeed in place to keep the internet safe and secure. What we decided to do is just give additional information to administrators, which are typically, it could be a safety counselor, it could be a principal, it could be a superintendent, to give a little more information on not just what's allowed and what's blocked as users are accessing the internet on a school-owned device. And I just want to reiterate, we're talking about school-owned devices, not personal-owned machines, just devices that you guys are all mandated to follow the Child Internet Prevention Act. So what we did as a company is we wanted to provide additional intel to those administrators to identify any potential behavior beyond just them accessing a website that might be inappropriate. We wanted to also give insight into, sentiment, right? Whether that is a child that may be getting bullied or harassed at school, maybe they're having suicidal thoughts. We wanted to give the insight to schools into that type of behavior with a proprietary product that we have that's part of Lightspeed. It's called Safety Check. So really at the end of the day, what we're doing is we have artificial intelligence built into the solution that's going beyond a typical, keyword alert. So typically most solutions will identify, hey, if someone uses the word like kill or bomb, suicide. But what we're actually doing is we're looking at several words in a sentence. So we're intelligently using our AI to identify harmful behavior, but we're trying to do it so we're preventing multiple false positives. We want to give solid, actionable information to administrators. So for example, one of the examples I used when I was talking to Bob about this is if a child went to a certain website and maybe they went to, let's just pretend that website is maybe Google, right? They're doing a search. And let's just pretend they typed in a phrase like, I can't take this anymore. In that phrase, there's not really anything actionable in there that would trigger any type of like a keyword alert. So what our AI is doing is analyzing those phrases and putting it together and saying, you know what, this phrase may be harmful. Let's alert or send an alert to a building level administrator to identify that child, we don't know 100%, but we're giving enough intel to that principal, to that superintendent, to that guidance counselor, whoever you choose to provide those alerts to identify there may be some abnormal behavior with that student. With our solution and with any solution that has this type of technology, it's never going to be 100%. It's not going to be perfect. But I will tell you, we've saved several lives, several thousands of lives over the course of this last year with several schools that have implemented this solution. Now, it does open up a lot of questions. It does, it's very common. And I think you guys are doing the right thing, which is having this conversation. And really what it comes down to is, and what I usually recommend with most districts, what size is to have these conversations, but also to engage maybe legal counsel, because at the end of the day, a lot of it's going to come down to, we like this technology, but who's liable for it? What happens if we miss something? What if we find out that a student ends up taking his life after school hours, right? These are the common questions that most schools will raise. And what I usually mention again to schools is, obviously we don't provide any type of legal counsel, but this is no different. This technology is no different than identifying a student on the inappropriate website, right? However, most schools, what they'll do is they'll sit down, they'll have a discussion with legal counsel on what's the boundaries, what are we responsible for at the district level. There is such a wide, I would just say, spectrum of interpretation of what schools are responsible for, that it's really hard for any manufacturer to say, here's a cut and dry process. Like I think, Maureen, I think you had brought up, like the solution can work 24 hours a day and monitor alerts. That is absolutely correct. But we also have the ability for you to turn off the alerts after school hours, because some school districts say, you know what, after the child has left our school district, we are no longer responsible. We have some schools that say we're responsible 24/7 as long as they have that device. So as you guys can see, it can really turn into and go into different directions, the conversation. But the one thing I always try to emphasize is what we're trying to accomplish with this product is saving lives. Again, we want to provide you guys the necessary tools to provide that insight into self-harm, into violence, into any type of abnormal behavior. And if we can give you guys just even in some cases, a little bit of a heads up before this harmful behavior is acted out, it's going to be extremely beneficial for any district that implements this product, but it does open up a lot of questions. So the first thing I would always recommend is to have legal counsel at the district level to explain what are the boundaries on, what time frame should we be getting these alerts? How do we handle these alerts? Who do we notify? A lot of schools that implement this solution will go through that exercise, and then they'll come back with the plan. Just again, similar to, how do we implement our web filter? How do we respond if a student is going to a site that's inappropriate? How do we handle that? This is just giving you guys more insight, more valuable information into that student's behavior, which is great because technology is always, it's always developing, evolving. And I'm just happy now that we've taken our conversations from filtering good and bad content to now actually looking and identifying harmful behavior. And this could be, again, everything from, bullying events to, a student that may be upset, may want to, go to school and do something to harm other people. It's, again, really providing that additional insight. So and hopefully this is giving you guys some retrospect of things to think about, things to implement. It's not a simple off-on, and I always let schools know that. Some schools have a plan already in place. Some already have safety, contacts at the district level. So it's definitely new. It's new technology, but it's definitely something that it's definitely worth investigating. And, you know, obviously, in my opinion, providing that insight to your administrators once you guys kind of figure out that game plan. Let me pause there and see if you guys have any questions on anything that I mentioned. Hopefully, you know, I explained this well, but, you know, let's go ahead and open up for any questions that you guys have.
Sure, thank you. I don't know if Mr. Manfredo or Mrs. Novak have any questions before we move on. But yeah, I'm sorry, John, you're muted. But yeah, go ahead, Mr. Manfredo.
Yeah, thank you. More of a statement than a question. Looking at the light speed research, it certainly has the ability to save a life. And that was explained, obviously, in a backup and also by Anthony. Now, in the research in various districts using it, what I found out is that many have said that they've enjoyed using this from day one. And it's alerted the district on issues that they didn't even know that students had, and did make a difference in the lives of some students. But as we're finding out tonight, however, you know, there certainly are questions that we need to need answers to. We do need to look into the liability effect on this. We have to figure out whether or not we turn it off after school, or do we keep it going 24/7? And if we do, who's going to be there to monitor this program? And we did find out too, which is important, I think, is that we're able to, you know, the other thing too is, are we able to have it at every school? That's another thing we need to consider. And as was mentioned, if there is a problem, one goes from the administration to someone who knows the child or knows the parent when calling up if there's someone that we have to contact, and I think that's important because you need a relationship to reach out to that child. Let's see, anything else? Oh yeah, the other thing that I mentioned is the number of hours that need to be considered as well. So yeah, thank you.
Rick, do you have anything to add? Yes. Tracy, do you have anything?
Pardon me? Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't. Can you hear? I didn't know if you could hear me or not.
Yeah, no, I had, I think, one question. I believe that what Mr. Bruno just said was that it's only district machines. My understanding was that it was actually anyone who signed in through our district system, regardless of what machine they're on. I think that perhaps that's a Mr. Walton question through the chair.
Walton?
Hello. Actually, I'm probably Anthony Bruno probably has a better answer for that and can describe how exactly that works.
No?
Yeah, basically so when it comes to the safety check safety mechanism, that requires a separate agent because we keep it optional for schools to deploy. Some schools have it on, some have it off. And everything that agent is pushed out on, it will then gather the safety alerts and then alert those administrators once it's set up. But it will not, I'd say 99.9%, or I should probably say 100% of the time, our solution is pushed out to school-owned devices. So if there's a personal machine or device that a student has, we would have to physically have our software loaded on their device, which is very rare. Again, because the SIPA compliance when it comes to filtering, including our safety software, is normally only pushed out to school-owned devices. If you guys have a circumstance where you guys have personal devices or machines for students that need to have our software on it, you know, that's fine. We have some schools that do that, but it's very rare. And then if you guys would choose to have the safety mechanism on those personal devices, it's certainly, again, feasible, but it's not very common. Mostly what we do from a filtering and safety aspect is on school-owned devices that most schools have authority over. But again, it is optional. So if you guys do have circumstances where parents say, you know what, we would like this, we would like the school to have this type of information to look into my students' behavior. It is completely up to the school district to make that decision, but typically that's not, I'd say, the norm.
Then am I, through the chair to the administration, understanding correctly then, my understanding then is that we actually do filter what students search when they're on their own devices if they're signed in through our system. Is that incorrect?
So I would say there's probably, and Bob, you could feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. So there is the school-owned devices and machines that we have our agent on that we're filtering. And then there's what we call BYOD, bring your own devices. So if you guys have a BYOD network and you guys allow students to bring their personal devices or even staff members, we can filter those devices that are allowed through BYOD. But as far as the safety software, again, that's not going to be pushed out to personal devices unless that's something that you guys have a special requirement for. And I'm not aware of that with Bob, working with Bob. Again, Bob, you correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think that's come up as a requirement, correct? You might be muted.
Yep. So, so my understanding, and we can clarify, and I think Anthony can clarify this where there's a confusion is. So the filtering software is a Chrome extension, and it's a user setting. So there's two types of settings generally: a user setting and a device setting. And so if it's a user setting, if I log in and I get my user settings, but then if a student logs into the same device, they're going to get their user settings. So we may have different settings, right? So each of these is a user setting, and we don't, filter the teachers' Chromebooks. But what we do with the students is it's a user setting, but we have the checkbox off in Relay to disable the Relay Chrome browser extension on non-Chromebook devices. So basically, if you're logged into Chrome on your Mac or your Windows PC, you're not going to get filtered on those devices. So that's why it's the district issued ones we're filtering on. But my understanding is if let's say you go buy a Chromebook at Best Buy with your own money, and then you log into that device using your Worcester Public Schools username, well, when you're doing that, you're accepting there's, all those things that we click OK to when we log into something that we don't really pay attention to. You're basically accepting that all the extensions that you get as a user of that device for that organization are going to load on there. So whether that's the filtering or the safety check, you would get those on there. So that's in terms of the filtering. Now, if you go buy a personal device, you say, I don't want to get filtered, you're more than welcome to log into that personal device with a Gmail, a personal Gmail account. And then you can open up a tab and get to your Worcester Public Schools stuff that way. It's logging into the Chromebook device as a Worcester Public School student is when you're going to get that filtering on there. Now, Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong, if this has been a bit now, but the safety check I thought had sort of one extra step is basically it's basically on for everybody regardless of whether you're logged in basically if you're logged into the Chrome browser on any device, whether it's a Windows device or a Mac, my impression, if I recall, was that safety check will work on those devices as well. Is that correct?
I believe so. Mark, if you're on and unmuted,
yeah,
you want to
sure
double check.
And thanks everybody. I know you don't see my video, unfortunately. My camera went down this past weekend, so I apologize. But yeah, it's first off, all these questions you guys are asking are very good, I think. And this is kind of the conversation that needs to be had before you implement a product like this. So I think it's two things. One, we're more, and Bob, I know you're kind of pointing to this, we're more kind of talking more about like the Google apps, right? in the Chrome management license agreement that you have with Google. So, and once you sign into a school-owned device, right, with that user login and information, we tie directly to Chromebooks, right? That's how we identify students. That's how we're able to tell if there is a safety check instance that is Anthony, right, with those credentials. So, yes, if it is something that is enabled within Relay, and when we've turned on that extension, we will see it. If a student signs in with the school credentials on a non-school issued device. Now, as Anthony mentioned before, there are plenty of different ways to eliminate that. One of which is by doing day and time, which Anthony mentioned before. We have the ability to completely turn it off, whether it's turned on from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., or we can have it always on. So for us, it's really tough to break that kind of, and I kind of see, I think, where your question's going, Tracy, of like, well, can we have it just on these school-owned machines when just the students sign in? And unfortunately, the second that student signs in is how we identify that student of who they are, right? So for us to take that away by signing into a school-owned device, I think that's a setting, Bob, that you could turn off. But that's tied to Google, right? And that's tied to the Chrome management license that you have. So I think that there is the ability, Bob, and correct me if I'm wrong, to turn off the ability for students to sign into any personal owned devices. So that necessarily doesn't fall on us because we attach to the name and to the Google license. And so, I know that that's not a very clean answer, but the way that our product works is once we talk directly to the Google tells us who the student is, right? The second that you break that connection, we can't identify that student, so we wouldn't be able to tell you if that student's looking something up inappropriately. I know that it's more of a how can we kind of stop this from happening when they're non-school owned devices, and it sounds like that's kind of more of a decision of, do we want to let students on non-school owned machines? Because the way that our system works, as Anthony mentioned, is to keep ourselves SIPA compliant, to keep ourselves under the Internet Protection Act. And there's going to be probably more and more of these that are going to come out over the next 18 to 24 months. And this is what Lightspeed's specialty is making sure within the contents of context of those regulations that you are all protecting yourselves and you're protecting your students. And by us activating that, we are able to say that you're compliant. So, I know that that's a very worded answer. It's just, there's no really simple one because, 18 months ago, unfortunately, a lot of these school districts weren't going home with these devices. Either that or a lot of them weren't letting their students get on a personal owned device. And if they knew that once they signed in, that's why that agreement's there. So, Tracy, I know that that's probably not a direct answer, but I'm really trying to give you the different answers that we hear. One of the things that somebody mentioned before was, is there other districts out there using this? And absolutely. What we started to notice was actually an uptick since students have been home of about 25 to 30% in a district your size of more just alerts from Lightspeed, right? So when we're starting to get more alerts, and that's just students maybe getting on the wrong website or, something that they shouldn't be doing. Out of those alerts, there was less people to monitor said alerts because of this remote environment. So what school districts actually started to utilize this was, we need to figure out what were those serious, notifications. So we started to see school districts that didn't adopt this before with that same, we didn't really want it. We had no way to understand how we were going to use this to start to implement it immediately because they needed that information. They didn't have enough people monitoring their filtering software. And this was important, right? To make sure that we saw if something was as serious as self-harm, suicide, that these were getting at least notified to someone within the school district as soon as possible. So I did want to add that piece on, and I will pause there.
Thank you, Mark.
To see if there's any other questions.
Yeah, I don't actually have any more questions, Mrs. Clancy. I do have a couple of comments. I don't know if you want those now or later.
No, sure. You can. Nope, now is fine.
I first want to note that there isn't actually any data behind this. The only thing that Lightspeed is presenting is one case study, and that person doesn't actually have any data either. They just sort of make a number of statements that they think that this happened. Now, it's obviously difficult to prove a negative, virtually impossible to prove a negative, but part of what we have going on here is, something that is arguably cutting edge, although I would also argue that we're getting into the kinds of technology that largely have been seen previously only in dystopian literature. I do think that, first of all, as I've already mentioned to my colleagues previously, part of the reason that there is such discussion of legal proprieties here is because, and as my colleagues know, this is part of the universe that I live in. The case law on this hasn't yet been sorted out, particularly when it comes to students' Fourth Amendment rights. Does a school-owned laptop fall under the same purview as a student locker, or does it fall under the same purview as, say, a student notebook? At what point does the district have the right to search, which is what this is, something that a student is using for school? And is there a line at which, because they're using our sort of system, even if it's their device, that we cross over into, well, we can search this even because it is ours, even though it is their device. That's why there's this whole conversation around the use of legal counsel. I would note, by the way, that there is not yet model policy for this for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, for exactly that reason. I've been part of those conversations at the state level, and we're not touching it yet because there's not case law yet. We, however, if for some reason my colleagues decide to go forward with this, we absolutely need super clear policy on this, because this is, frankly, I think, nightmarish. I will say that I think this is a bad idea. I think that Mr. Walton made a very, very cohesive demonstration when he talked about the kinds of things that were flagged when we got the pilot, which is that, yes, we did get one case where we were concerned about the student's actual mental health. We also got one in which the student was doing research for a class that was about veteran suicide and how would you, and for an AP government class. I don't want, first of all, I want our students to be able to do that kind of research. That's super helpful. Given the example that we were just given, I did a quick Google search just to see what would come up. If you search, I just can't take it anymore, the first 10 options are, if you can't take it anymore, here are resources to help you with that. So in many ways, the technological universe is already kind of moving in that direction. Is that something that I necessarily want to do that? I will also note, by the way, that it's a song by the Lemonheads. You're searching lyrics, which is something I find myself doing. Do we need to have an administrator alerted for that? And this really gets to me also. I would oppose this, frankly, simply on the grounds of the Fourth Amendment already, but to the point that both the superintendent and Mr. Walton have raised, which is that we don't have the staff for this. Like, we've got 25,000 students who are on these computers all the time. And I don't think, and we know that kids are doing homework in the evenings and they're doing it on weekends. And, I don't know if you're familiar with the schedules of secondary school students, but they're not stopping at 3 and they're not stopping at midnight. They're just as liable to be looking at something at 2 o'clock in the morning that legitimately is for school, even though for maybe some adults, they're alarmed because of the time of day. And that's going to go off. I don't think that, particularly in the universe in which we live, that are the sort of this notion of there are hours at which this happens and doesn't, is at all legitimate. But I also am going to say, from a very just strict financial perspective, if we're going to devote resources to trying to make sure that our kids don't commit violent acts and don't hurt themselves, my gosh, let's get ourselves some more psychologists and some more school adjustment counselors. I don't want to put more, assistant principals or IT people or whatever on this. I want us to actually, this afternoon, I was having another conversation with yet another Worcester Public School parent whose child is in a mental health crisis. I know that I am not alone among my colleagues in having this conversation over the last 8 months, but I'm also not alone among my colleagues in not having had this conversation over the last 2 years or whatever. There aren't resources. There aren't enough. People are going to their pediatricians and saying, my kid is in crisis. Where am I going to go? And you can't find a child psychologist. You can't find an inpatient facility. You can't get an appointment anywhere in Massachusetts, and it's a national crisis. So, I mean, the other piece of this is that if we decide to turn this on, we put resources towards the technology end to say, okay, we're going to have people who are watching this day and night. It gets flagged, it goes to the principal calls the parent still doesn't have anybody to call because there's no resources for that. I would argue, Madam Chair, that from the actually let's help the students end of things, let's put our resources and attention on that end, that there's people who exist in the universe of the Worcester Public Schools who, first of all, may very well be establishing relationships with students. It turned out that the conversation I had this morning, the student already had a relationship with the school adjustment counselor. We got the child steered there, and now we're getting somewhere. But if we didn't have the school adjustment counselor, then I wouldn't have been able to do that. If we had 4 more, maybe that would have been better. It's certainly better than spending money to try to track this stuff down. I don't want the superintendent spending her time on that. I don't want the principals spending their time on that. I want them actually being available for the relationships. We know this from other stuff, which is that it's the relationships rather than the technology that actually heads this off.
Novick. So for me, I mean, I do agree. I think I had a lot of questions around the liability, and that was just one thing I was going to do, was try to refer this to our legal counsel just to see because, when we were discussing the weekends and if we don't, what's our time frame to respond if you get an alert, if we don't make that, there was just a lot of liability questions that I do have. And as a lot of you do know that, especially right now, the mental health of our students is one of my top priorities. But I just don't know if we have the manpower right now to monitor a system like this, or, I don't know that we have the training behind it to be able to just start us, put this today, say, start this, start the pilot back up tomorrow. And then we're like, but what do we do if this happens or that happens? So I'm just not at that point right now to say, turn it back on. I would like to see if we could get, like I said, some legal counsel to look at this, to see what our liability is, because we are a huge district. And do we have the manpower if we turn this on, across the district? Do we have the manpower to monitor something like this, to follow up with something like this? And I mean, I just have a lot of concerns that if we're, calling parents, well, are the parents, cause for some students to want to, self-harm, self-injury? I just have a lot of questions about that. Are we going to, make situations a lot worse for the students? And I agree. They need to have that trusting adult to be able to be that person who is going to, be the point of contact for our district. That's a huge thing that we need to be looking at. So I like I said, I would like to make a motion to that we refer this over to our legal counsel to get, their point of view on it and see, if it's something that we should be implementing as a district. And like I said, I'm just not ready to turn it back on at this point. Mr. Manfredo? You're muted. That's okay.
I agree with you, Madam Chair. We really can't vote on this tonight. We do need a legal opinion. We also need administration to come up with some guidelines how this would operate. Do we shut it off? Do we keep it going? What type of training is taking place? There are many questions that need answering, as well as the cost factor, as Ms. Novick mentioned. Is the money best used for something else in terms of social, emotional training? I don't know. So there are a lot of factors that we need to examine first, get some answers before moving forward. No, thank you.
Thank you. So at this point, that's the motion that I would like to say, is to refer this to legal counsel for further review. And at this point, I think we're just going to leave it. It's turned off at this point. I think, we'll continue to have it turned off. And then if we can get the legal aspect on that going forward. Yes, Ms. Superintendent Benenda?
Yes, and we also have Mara Mahoney on this, and also our elementary managers and secondary, to let you know that just as Mrs. Novick said today, our school adjustment counselors and our clinicians are reaching out to students and also providing the support that they need. So I just don't want, anyone that's listening to think that there isn't anything going on that's actually also doing that with a personal relationship, because that makes the biggest difference for kids. So even our school nurses have reached out also, because of, referring to the pediatrician or our school adjustment counselors. Everybody is really working to try to provide those supports around our students. So students that are experiencing stress are able to get some support.
Maureen, I hate that you feel that you need to say that about our SACs and our, counselors and our nurses, and because I have seen it firsthand. They're going to kids' houses. I get daily phone calls on the students that I work with from school adjustment counselors and guidance counselors, and it's wonderful. I know that they're, we're really trying. It's we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we're doing our best right now, but our staff is doing an amazing job. But like Mrs. Novick said, we don't have enough of them. We need more of them, and especially if we're going to be supporting a system like this, we're going to have to, have a lot of hands on deck to be able to filter out, given a school district of over, almost 26,000 students, 2 schools. We had a lot, I think you said 8 responses, and it wasn't on for that long. If we went fully across the district, 26,000 kids, 44 schools, whatnot, I think we're going to be, it's going to be a huge undertaking on our behalf. So that's where I am right now. I don't know if anyone else has anything else to say.
I just want to say that we also do have a hotline that Mr. Pizzella monitors also, where if there are any concerns, we have a COVID concern hotline, any concerns from isolation due to COVID, and also a bully hotline. And both of those Mr. Pizzella monitors, and they do get really quick responses also.
Okay, thank you. And I do want to note, because I did see that there's 2 colleagues. I wanted to also note that school committee member Diana Biancaria and Molly McCullough are both here in attendance with us today. Diana, I didn't know you had your hand raised. Did you want to say something?
First of all, I want to thank you. I think this is the best avenue to go at this particular time. I did want to add in one piece that has come across that no one likes to say or no one likes to think about, and that is when you look at something like this, if you don't have the staff, you don't have the training, you're not ready for this, and God forbid, should something happen, the liability and the responsibility for something that could possibly be a devastating to a student, the family, and people who are doing this and overseeing it. I wouldn't want to be the person who, unfortunately, something slipped through the cracks. And let's face it, it happens consistently, unfortunately. If somebody missed something and then something else happened. So I'm looking at not only getting the legal opinion, but also once we take a look at the legal opinion, always keep in mind, hopefully school committee members, that the emotional part of this really has to be investigated. And I truly don't think we have the funding to fulfill what needs to be fulfilled to have something like this for 26,000 students right now.
Thank you.
I think we have many challenges, but that's a piece of it that I've thought about is we have so many challenges, and if we're not prepared, truly prepared and trained, then we may miss something.
Thank you. Okay. So Madam Clerk, are we looking to take a roll call on
Roll
my
call.
motion? Thank you.
Chairman Clancy,
Yes.
Vice Chair Monfredo,
Yes.
and Ms. Novick.
Yes.
And
I'd
that
like
was to
thank
seek the legal opinion
Oh, yes, it was. Sorry. Thank
regarding
you.
the implementation of this.
And
Thank
do we
you.
have to make a motion on to have it remain turned off, or?
No, because you didn't.
Okay. Okay.
Nothing
Thank you.
changed. Thank you.
I'd like to
May I
thank,
just-
oh, yes, Ms. Novak.
May I just ask what for one clarifying? Where would we be sending this for a legal opinion?
City Law Department.
The city law department. Okay, that's good. Because I'm just thinking
city solicitor,
because we've
correct?
got that.
Right.
Yeah, we've got that.
Yeah.
We've got the liability question, but I also would be interested in sort of the civil rights constitutional law aspect, and that's good. That's the right place for it. Then thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank Mr. Bruno and Mr. Russo for being here with us tonight. Thank you for the information. It was very helpful, and thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Have a good evening.
Thank you all so much. And anything we could do to help, we're here for you all, no matter what. So thank you all for having us, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, we ready to move on? So now we're going to take up item 1-1, which was to consider the communication from the EAW to allow the member of Burncoat High School faculty and staff to donate accrued sick time to a colleague. Just a little background on this. It was brought to us at our last school committee meeting from the EAW for an IA over at Burncoat High School who had not been part of the sick bank. And she has been sick, and the staff at Burncoat High donated I think it's like 180 days right now for her to use towards her sick time to supplement her leave while she's with us right now. I know that she's working half days, if I'm not mistaken, half days. She has a doctor's note. And so this time was used to supplement the rest of the day to make it a full days paid for her. And at the last meeting, the mayor had requested that we honor those days and that they would be covered until our school committee meeting this Thursday, so that we could have this meeting to decide how we can proceed on this item. I know that there's two members of the union here to speak with us tonight, Mr. Davis and Ms. Chamberlain, and I'm not sure if either one of you would like to speak first.
I'll defer to Ms.
Okay, Mr. Davis.
She answers all your questions. I'll just listen. Thank you.
Ms. Chamberlain, do you have anything to add to what was discussed, or?
Excuse me, Ms. Clancy, we, I believe, have sent a list of 53 days and the people that have donated them over to Jennifer Boulay. And it's my understanding that those 53 days will get Lorraine to just after her next doctor's appointment for the half days. And excuse me, we have the rest are in a holding pattern, I guess I want to say, until we see how she makes out. And, you know, if we do end up going back to school and she's not able to come back, or, you know, however it might work out in the end.
Thank you. I'm not sure I'm going to give my opportunity for any of my colleagues to speak. Or actually, I'm sorry, let me see if there's anyone from the administration who wants to speak on this item.
Yes, I'd like to speak on it. So this item had come up similar to another item for another school. And we had suggested to the EAW that they bring that up in negotiations. And that has not been brought up yet at all in negotiations. And I really feel that that's where this item belongs, belongs in negotiations. Anything to do with using sick days, access to the sick leave bank really does belong in negotiations. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Mr. Manfredo, or Ms. Novick, do you
Sure.
have anything? Okay, Mr. Manfredo.
Thank you.
Followed by Ms. Novick. Thank you.
I would certainly support assisting a staff member in need. However, there certainly has to be a policy on this issue, or at least it should be part of the contract, IA's contract, as we move forward. Perhaps all parties could come up with some proper wording with Mr. Sweeney as part of the contract by the end of March. In the meantime, we could give the IA enough sick time until the end of March, or until she returns to see what her doctor says. That's just a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Novick.
I guess through the chair to the administration, I think this may be a Ms. Boulay question. If we move forward as Ms. Chamberlain is proposing, would we need to come back to us again to vote again if she needs the implementation of more days?
Through the chair, it's an interesting question because it seems as though the committee has already established through negotiating how days can go to a member who's out of days. So the action that the committee is contemplating is actually something that's going contrary to what they've already committed to in the collective bargaining agreement. So I think now that you're at that point where you're sort of extra beyond the contract that you've already negotiated, I think that it would probably just be a matter of how you would word your motion. As Ms. Chamberlain indicated, we did receive a list from EAW President Nugent, and I think she said 54 days. That sounds about right to me. It was in the the mid.
I think it was 53, but yeah.
Yeah. So right around there is, so everything she said is true, and we have that list. And at this point in time, the employee in question is working half days. So again, Ms. Chamberlain explained this in her response as well, which is she's taking the half day increments. So there are 50 some odd full days that have been donated at this point in time. And the employee is currently in need of half sick days, not full sick days.
Okay, so Madam Chair, I think I would do two things. I would make a motion for the days through her next doctor's appointment as requested, with additional days if required by her medical her medical experts. That would be my motion. And then I would say we are currently in negotiations, or actually, frankly, just opening negotiations with the EAW on successor contracts. I don't think I probably need to make a referral of this there, but I simply will note the fact that we are only opening successor contracts at this point. So obviously there's grounds for discussion over general, as Mr. Manfredo noted, this belongs in the collective bargaining agreement. I think there's general acknowledgement that changes to the collective bargaining agreement may well be in order. That's something that's bound by negotiations, not by the subcommittee.
Thank you. Mr. Manfredo, did you want to add something else?
Well, if we're talking 53 days, does that translate into 106 days?
So I'm not sure. Jennifer, can you, if it's half days, because when I did the math prior to coming into the meeting, and I counted from now excluding February vacation, I would be 44 full days is what she would need to get her to around the end of March. So I was thinking, if it's 25 days, would that be enough since it's half days at this point?
So I'm not sure that I have available to me some of the specific dates that have been discussed. So I've heard tonight one date is the date at which she might have to return to the building. So school committee does currently have an approved plan. And so we would know if she's in that group that you still have the firm date for, the March 8th group, we have that date. If it's the group C, then that will be coming. So that's a date that we could have. I'm not aware of the date of the medical appointment, but if she would be willing to share it, then we could calculate it. I mean, we're almost at the midpoint of the school year, and this particular employee works the basically the school year. So we're probably at around the point when there might be 195 days left for students. And so this particular employee's work schedule would be very similar to that. So that's kind of the number that would get to the end of the work year, end of the school year, if that helps the committee at all with thinking about the different numbers.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think Ms. Chamberlain, you had mentioned this at the last meeting that her next doctor's appointment was on March 10th. Is that correct?
I believe that was the date she gave me.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Ms. Menenda?
So just another concern is that this person was not eligible for the sick leave bank. I have never been eligible for the sick leave bank. And I just was wondering if the school committee was not let this be precedent setting, because we have many employees in this situation who are not eligible for the sick leave bank. So I don't know if this would be not precedent setting in making this decision.
Thank you. I know that I know that school committee member Molly McCullough is on, and I'm not sure if she can talk. Andrew, is there any way for an attendee to?
Oh, just me.
Oh, Molly, yes, we can hear
but
you.
I
Molly.
don't want to take over before Mr. Monfredo and Ms. Novick as they're on.
Oh, I didn't know. Did Mr. Monfredo, did you have your hand? I didn't see your hand.
Yeah.
Again. I'm sorry. Mr. Monfredo?
Again, that's why we need to have a policy. And the same thing with what Ms. Novick had suggested as well. We need to have something in place, because we need to look at how a person, an IA, gets into the sick leave bank. What does she have to do to make this happen? But in the meantime, we're certainly out trying to assist this unfortunate IA who needs help now. So perhaps, as you had said, Ms. Clancy, maybe we can have something. She goes to the doctor on March 10th. Maybe we can continue to have it go until March 30th. And then we may have to take it up if there's enough, if she needs additional days.
Okay, thank you, Ms.
Madam Chair.
Ms. Novick, yes?
I just want to observe that there's 5 members of the Worcester School Committee on this subcommittee right now, which is a quorum. And we're coming super, super close to talking about stuff that's actually in the collective bargaining agreement and our successor contract. I think that we need to, if we want to talk about this case, we talk about this case. I don't want to talk about the sick bank in general. I don't want to talk about success, because this is not the time and place for it. We need to be super careful about our policing ourselves here.
Absolutely. Thank you. Ms. McCullough?
Sure. So I certainly agree with Mrs. Novick, and we obviously have to make sure we're watching ourselves with that. I would just say that I am in support of us working with this particular employee on this matter and getting her the days through, which we had already agreed before at the general meeting, and getting her to that next appointment date, or perhaps, like Mr. Monfredo said, March 30th, and then revisiting it and then dealing with future things separately. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So going through this, like I said, I had done a little calculation, and my motion was going to be that we award her, it was the 44 days, and that would give her until March 31st. I'm not sure, though, since she only has to use half days, if it should be only, 25 days. Ms. Boulay, I'm not sure if you could answer that for me. Would it be a half day that we're giving her or do we award her, to do the full 40 days to get her through the end of March so that we can come back for?
So, Ms. Clancy, if it's helpful to you, if the committee wants to provide a date through which they would be willing to support the employee, if the committee specifically wants to only support in half-day increments, then that can be part of your motion. Or if the committee wants to say they support donations through a certain date, and if the employee only needs a half day, maybe there are days when the employee doesn't need any sick time. Maybe there are days when she needs a full day. if the committee doesn't really have a preference for how its assistance is given, then if you give us a date with the stipulation that these have to be days that, you know, are identified and donated, right? We're not going to manufacture days. We're going to take donations. Then we can work with the payroll department to, and Mr. Nugent with the priority list. So he gave us a list of the names of the donators in the order that we should take the days in. So we can work with Mr. Nugent as far as the order that we take days in, and the payroll department as far as knowing for any given pay period how much time is needed. And if the committee wants to put some sort of end date or a cap on the total number of days, either one of those, we can work with the other, you know, the other two and figure out how to make that happen.
Okay, thank you. Just Ms. Novick?
I
Yes.
think that at least in my case, Madam Chair, I would like her to be able to proceed with her medical treatment without her feeling that this is hanging over her, which is why in my motion, I said, let's get her through her next doctor's appointment and then grant her whatever she needs under the requirements that are given to her by her medical practitioner. I think it would be nice for them to have a load off everyone's mind, and also, you know, for potentially the EAW not to have to come back to us and has to have another emergency meeting to make. It seems to me that if there is intent on the part of the EAW members to cover her as much as is necessary, thus fulfilling what Ms. Boulay needs in order to, you know, make sure that it is covered under payroll and all of the rest, I think that our appropriate action is to say, allow that process to play out within the parameters of what is medically needed by this employee.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to jot down the motion.
I had said through her next medical appointment,
Yes.
and then whatever
Right.
additional days are needed after that, according to doctor's orders.
Okay, so actually, I'm agreeing on that motion. So I don't know if we want to just do a roll call on that motion, because that would get us through her next doctor's appointment and then whatever is the recommendation of her doctor at that point.
Would you like a roll call taken now?
Yes, I would. Thank you.
Chairman Clancy?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Monfredo?
Yes.
And Ms. Novick?
Yes.
Okay, that's actually our two items for tonight's meeting. I think we can call, I'll do a roll call for adjournment, Mrs. Frio.
Chairman Clancy?
Yes.
Vice Chair Monfredo?
Yes.
And Ms. Novick?
Yes.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here. Thank you, Mrs. McCullough and Ms. Biancaria for joining us tonight, and have a good evening. I'll see you all on Thursday night.
Thank you all for everything.
Thank you, Madam Chair.